All right. Hello, everybody. How's it going today? My name is Andrew with First Gen Entrepreneurs. Hey, Nicholas, how's it going today?
Great, and how are you?
Doing pretty good. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day for me.
Absolutely. I can't wait. You went and hit me up in the DMs and said you had a great topic idea. How could I say no?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, for those of you who are unacquainted, I'd like to welcome you to the show today. This is the First Gen Entrepreneurs community and podcast live event that I'm working on. All of that is upcoming stuff, and the live events are here to start bringing some value to the First Gen Entrepreneurs group of folks out there who are either bold enough or crazy enough to start a business to be the first ones in their family to do so. And so my goal is just simply to find some smart people like Nicholas to join me on this show once a week and share some valuable insights for those of you who want to avoid maybe making some costly mistakes, save yourself some time, some money, some heartache, etc., with some useful advice each week. So, Nicholas, again, thank you so much for being on the show. We've got a few people that are coming in. Want to say hello to my buddy Andy. Let me put this up here on the chat because he makes an excellent point. Excellent point. Did Timbaland write the intro to this? Um, yes, actually, I am on a first name basis with him, and he mixed that together for me. So that's a great way to do that. Thank you, Andy, for that. But yeah, so Nicholas, I wanted to have you on the show today because as was mentioned in the title, um, how to book a meeting with anyone on LinkedIn. I think that is something that a lot of people would love to know the answer to, and it's not an easy thing to answer. I'm gonna guess that the way to do this is not by pitch slaps. Is that a fair statement?
You know what? The irony is that used to work. I will
Mm,
give people that say that, that's the best way to do things. It did work a couple years ago. It was a best practice. Just it's not anymore. 2019 and COVID killed like since 2019 and COVID it killed it. Doesn't work as well.
right. What's interesting is I actually got um, one of those yesterday, and it was from a personal trainer. Reached out to connect with me. I accepted, and immediately got hit up with their pitch. That was, which in itself was sure. Why wouldn't I want to have more energy and be in good shape and all those things? But just the approach was a complete turn off, right? Because no trust had been built, no relationship was there. And I actually said as much to this person. I wrote back and said, "Hey, just FYI, like in the LinkedIn community, these are often referred to as pitch slaps, and they're not super popular. So I'm just gonna give you some feedback." And the person's response was, "Okay, no problem. And then here's the digital download. Let me know if this resonates with you, yes or no." And I was like, I might
Oh,
be
no
talking
shit.
to a bot or something.
Mhm.
So, not a very effective approach for getting new leads, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit today about how a person should go about booking a meeting with anybody who you want to as a prospective client on LinkedIn specifically. Something that you and I talked about, Nicholas, was old school selling versus new school selling. So do you mind kind of unpacking that a little bit and tell us what do you think are the differences between those two things?
Yeah. I think I have to start on a big point. Cold calling's dead. No, just kidding. No. What this old school versus new school is basically the buyer's change. Selling hasn't. That's part of the problem. When we used to be road warriors, we'd map out our routes and we'd go and just knock on doors. We'd have our, left, right, behind. You'd have that main route that you'd work. But back in those times, we were the conduit of information. We were that single source of truth. What we told them was basically all they got. But since then, what has changed? Well, we have access to the world's information on a smartphone in our hand. We have internet. We have the ability to go and talk to each other remotely, like what we're doing right now, and live stream. So people are changing the way they research, which is pushing off how how long or where you come into the buying process. And so what happens? How do we normally sell? Well, change management says, why change? Why now? Why you? And what does everybody start with? Why you? And that's why the pitch slap is so unfriendly because people aren't logging onto LinkedIn. They're not waking up every morning and going, "Oh my god, you know what I really wanna buy? Personal training. That's what
Right.
I."
Right.
And we're
Even
all
though, to be fair, I do need some personal training. Let's be honest. It is what it is. But nonetheless, it wasn't very effective.
and you think about that, like, you maybe you're researching it right now, and maybe somebody saw that intent, and because we have access to all these really cool tools that I wish I woulda had 10 plus years ago,
Right.
and you're sitting there and you're going, "Yeah, but, I'm it's good enough for now." And I think that's the biggest difference is people are just so overwhelmed, and there's this fear of messing up. And, in B2B sales, that makes you have the death by committee, but it also means that people would rather do nothing and not have to worry about changing because change is so risky. So for you think about personal training, what would make most people want to go and do that? Well, like New Year's resolution, like Dan Pink's when, that's a Kickstarter where people are mentally open to change or they know they need to, or you're getting married, or there's a graduation, or, you know, an old school reunion. But though it's all based on trigger events, something strong enough that it's worth changing for. And I think that's what's just missed in so much with the old school versus new schools. Old school, you had a pitch, and because there wasn't much competition, you actually were better than the rest. And now it's not even good enough to be better than the rest. Now you have to master timing and be
Right.
credible.
So the way I think of prospecting and sales in the old school mentality is that you've got this funnel, and at the top is where you put your prospects, and then they work their way down from prospects into proposals and then ultimately sign something, right? And
Mhm.
it's a simple mathematical equation that if you just load enough prospects in the top, you knock on enough doors, you make enough cold calls, then mathematically that's going to trickle down to get you the result that you need.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's basically a brute force approach. The more you knock, the more you call, the more success you're going to have. Is that still an effective way of looking at it, in your opinion?
I think that that approach sells us short as sellers. Because as we're trying to go and knock on doors and as we're pushing ourselves to go and do this outreach, it's only ever one to one. That's it. But that's the biggest thing that happened in sales in the past 10, 15 years, and especially since COVID, is that we can now earn trust at scale. And so, what we would normally be saying in those first or second meetings, why do they have to wait to be in a meeting to hear that? And we sit in a meeting and there's always those aha or those uh oh.
Hmm.
Those big emotional responses that happen, or you ask a great question and then there's that long pause. Those are those insights. If you read Challenger Customer or if you're a Challenger seller, those commercial insights are what change everything. Once they know, they can't unknow, but we need to give that to them out in the world because now we can. So we need to, sales now is almost a hybrid between sales and marketing. And one of the things I notice is the best sellers act like marketers. And so instead of waiting to that first and second meeting to get this information out, they send it out right away to earn that credibility and help with that change management so people are mentally ready to have that conversation when they book the meeting. And the thing that I've noticed is really interesting is they actually start with a champion right away. So people are bypassing a lot of that process and they're ready. You've probably heard me say the analogy before, the marketing helped them figure out where they wanted to buy their suit.
Hmm.
Now they're coming to you because they needed help tailoring it, and that's the new
Right.
process.
Right. So let's expand on that. This is the next point that we discussed in preparing for this. But if a person kind of has this old school approach, you the way you put it is that they might be getting caught in people's mental spam filters. So what do you mean by that?
This I can't take credit for this. This is Will Allred of Lavender that first said this, and it just stuck. And we think of Google in the inbox, and the inbox actually looks for words and it signals that it's spam.
Hmm.
Well, our brains do that as well. I'm sure you've had, a significant other, children, or somebody go and talk to you, and the tone of voice or the way they start that question lets you know exactly what's about to happen. And either you'll lean in or you'll tune out. Well, the reason for my call today, all those sentences, they give us a hint of what's about to happen. And the problem is because of automation and because of the volume and people just focusing on like, you know, the Fortune 50 prestige accounts, and they're not actually looking for companies that showed signs and symptoms of a problem. These people are getting thousands of emails a day. And so what happens when you see 1,000 emails? You start to notice patterns. And even not at
Right.
that volume, like when somebody connects with you and then you instantly hear the ping and you see that they went and sent you a message, what's going through your head?
You already know. Yeah, they just hit me with a message. They're just trying to sell me something.
So how do we battle this? If we're always guilty until proven innocent, what do we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to add a little more emphasis to your point about pattern recognition as humans, I now when I get emails, even when they're doing the right things, like it's coming really appears like it's coming from a human.
Yeah.
It didn't hit my spam filter. It's in my inbox, but just the way the subject is written, you can tell that like they put thought into trying to be clever with it, right? And it takes is one click and me to scan it. I haven't even read the whole thing, and I've already noticed a pattern with what's happening here. And if I'm not in the mood uh, or have a specific need, they've lost me before they ever even got started.
One thing I found interesting just studying social psychology, looking at behavioral economics, and looking at the way that our brains naturally work is we crave context. And
Mhm.
so what I think, and I haven't dug deep enough into this, but what I think is that our brains look at is the context based on what you want or what I need. And so when
Right.
people see a selfish pitch, they automatically avoid it and it's spam because cool. So what? That's the so what pitch. Hey, we're number one at cybersecurity and we're doing this, this, and this. So what? Why do I care? But if somebody says, hey, I was just looking at your website terms and noticed that your security certificates are outdated, which actually makes you liable for a lawsuit. We've helped a few others with this. Interested?
Hmm.
We're
Right.
like, wow, that context, that observation led to that context of, holy crap, I can't ignore this. And I think that's what people just crave in their inbox now is they either you need a legitimate reason to reach out and interrupt their day that it's worth the interruption, or they'd rather just be networking, get to know people, that race to commonality, what are your hobbies? What do you enjoy doing? The only time that you just got to be careful because if you start on a personal level and switch to professional and it feels like a bait and switch and that'll burn bridges faster than you can build them.
That's interesting that you mention the psychology behind when someone's approaching you. Are they coming to you with something that you need or something that they want? And that right there can be the very divide between whether I'm going to pay attention to what you have to say for the next 30 seconds or at all versus just shutting you out completely. And I had never thought of it that way, but I think when you're intentional about approaching someone in any context, but you make it clear from the get that you're there to offer them something that they need, then it can change the tone, it can change the reaction, and have a whole different outcome at that point.
I wanted to ask you a question. Somebody asked me this the other day, and I thought it was so good, and I've been waiting for an opportunity to ask it again. So, they how did they phrase it? Oh shoot, I'll bring it back up later. I apologize. I have to think of how they phrased it because it was so good. But they were talking about credibility and problems, and it had to do with social psychology. It'll come back to me. I apologize. I'll have to go and bring it up after.
Well, I'll in the meantime, maybe this will help prompt it in your head. But Katarina, I hope I'm saying that correctly. uh, that context based on what you want or what I need. Again, just to not to be a broken record here, but that resonates with me too. And I think that that's part of what we can sense so quickly as a prospect, as a potential buyer. Whenever someone's contacting us, you're going to know very quickly, right? And that speaks to the difference between that old school selling, the new school selling, inbound versus outbound, and all these things. I think we're seeing a shift where it's not that the old school way of doing things just flat out doesn't work anymore, but it is losing effectiveness, and it's getting harder by the day, by the week, to get the same results as you used to.
I remember the question now.
Okay.
If someone tells you how long they've been doing something and you can't tell by the way they act, does it kill their credibility? Would they been better off to say nothing?
I think so, personally. Yeah. I think, if just look at an athlete, like look at the person who talks a big game and tells you all their statistics and how long they've been playing basketball, but then can't actually show it on the court. Like the guy who's genuinely good doesn't need to float those statistics out there in the first
Mhm.
place. Yeah. On that subject, I have a burning question for you, Nick, and maybe anybody listening to this, leave this in the chat. Who's the greatest basketball player of all time? Is it Michael Jordan or is it LeBron James? And depending on your answer, I might ask you to leave the studio. So, uh, what if anybody listening, leave that in the chat. Let me know who's the greatest of all time, Michael Jordan or LeBron James. But Nick, I want to hear your thoughts on that. Or are you neutral because you live in Canada?
I would go MJ. Like, you look at his career and what he did for the sport, and I would say that when you look at impact and skill, it's still there. It'd be like somebody going and switching to hockey and saying, Wayne Gretzky is not as good because, the teams are just so much better now. Yeah, but he was that good then, so MJ all the way.
Let's can I put this little chat up? Oh, it won't, it'll only do it on new comments. But we've got, I think, a consensus here. Eric has the correct answer. Um let's see, where do we go? Andy's got the correct answer, and this shouldn't be a discussion. I agree, Andy. Like there's really no debate. Now here we have the historian, my friend Derek. He's throwing in a third option. Disagree with you, brother. But there's a reason Nick is staying on the show because he answered correctly. I'm from Illinois. There's no debate on this, but believe it or not, I've had people try to make the case for LeBron, and it's just not the same. But
No.
anyway, getting back to it. So we've got this question about getting caught in people's mental spam filters. I think the short answer is a lot of people feel that, right? We can feel your prospecting, your marketing. It's harder than ever to get through to people, to your audience, because the general population is so calloused or just trained to recognize the pattern of sales and kind of shut that down. So let's get into the meat now of what we want to answer, right? Because if
Do
you're
it.
a person who's selling a product or service, how can we book that meeting with anybody that we want? How can we kind of break through and become more effective in that? And your answer to that is that you've got this bottom up approach to selling. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah, as much as fun as it is to go unicorn hunting, I haven't found one yet. And, the sellers that are doing the mythical unicorn looking for that senior decision maker, yes, it is nice when you get them. But the reality is, are you actually ready for that conversation or should you go and build a case first? Like if you're going to court, you wouldn't just walk in and try to talk your way through it, which most sellers do. And that's why most traditional sales is failing right now because that's what used to work. Now we have to be better prepared than ever. And so I love going bottom up because what I do is I map the earthquake. And mapping the earthquake, if you think about an earthquake, there's always an epicenter and then it ripples out. That's how the problem is felt in an organization. So whatever you sell, it solves a main problem. So what problem what workflow is that problem associated with? What's the main one? And so what the easiest way to think about this is what function? What is the main function? Is it business development? Is it marketing? Is it engineering? Is it IT? And then what you do is you map out from there what what other functions are affected when this function isn't working properly. Who gets the call in the middle of the night when it's not going well? What would make the P&L owner scream that they need to fix it, or, they've had enough that either they're going to get rid of it or they're going to fix it. And what you're doing is you're looking for that signs, but the reason why you start bottom up is because people on the bottom are more approachable and they want to have conversations. So if I wanted to go and approach a company to learn about their sales process, should I go to their director of sales, VP of sales, or somebody in C-suite? Or should I just go talk to an SDR and AE and like, hey, do you ever find it such a pain in the ass to go and figure out who to talk to? Or do you find that you're doing more calls and getting nowhere, your connect rates are low? Like, you're going to tease out one of your hypotheses of what you think is going wrong. And I'll give you an easier example. If I see a company's hiring a whole bunch of sales development reps, it tells me that they're prioritizing top of funnel. So if I go to one of their SDRs and say, hey, do you find it got a lot harder to book meetings? Or did they or is there a big push to increase your volume? No, actually, they're starting this new initiative. They're actually trying to go and break into this new account, and we're actually hiring a whole bunch of people. Oh, who's responsible for that? Why? How, tell me a little bit more about that. And what you're doing is the highest form of trust is to get a referral or an introduction. But I would rather earn my credibility and build that business case with each conversation and doesn't even have to be in a meeting. So that when I go to the VP of sales, like, hey, I was talking to one of your SDRs and they were saying that even if you add a bunch more people, the reason that they're struggling is they don't have the ability to go and research properly. So when they talk to people, it's simply the best messaging and it's super they're just getting nowhere, no responses. And if they keep this up, you would actually have to hire 150 people to hit your goal, which is not affordable. I have a couple other options. Interested?
Right. That's interesting. So, I think my background, I owned an IT consulting company, and I did the exact opposite of what you're suggesting to be done is that you're always looking to book a meeting with decision makers, right? Like, what's the point in talking to someone if they're not the person who's able to sign the contract to get the business?
Yep.
But applying what you just said to my business model, it's like if I start with what in the IT world we call the end users, right? Start with them
Mhm.
first, then that's probably where you're likely to get the feedback on what problems. They're like, yeah, you know what? All day, every day, my computer runs slow or it crashes 10 times. Okay, how does that affect your productivity, your job? Well, yeah, this week I've gotten nothing done at all. Well, now you're starting to build a financial case for like the problems you're experiencing are having these impacts, these ripple effects that you're talking about. So that by the time I do speak with the decision maker, I've got not just hypothetical stuff about how I can help your IT run better, but like boots on the ground, material data that I'm armed with, and I've got some of that trust as I'm approaching them. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's dead on. And then when you've got that mapped out, then all you're doing is you're looking at you might actually score that account from like below the power line, above the power line in those key functions, and you'll look at, okay, where do these people show up every day? Where do these people go to learn? Where do these people go to get entertained? Is it TikTok? Is it LinkedIn? Do they subscribe to a newsletter? What is their go-to? And then that'll define the way that they want us to show up. And so one of the fastest way to book meetings is comments. Why? Problem aware posters, people that are posting about a problem, gossip, drama, whatever that may be, you want to look at it. It's because they're frustrated and they don't know how to fix it. So they're putting it out in the world for somebody to help them understand it. Not fix it, understand it. So social listening right now is super powerful, but it's not the VP of sales that's airing out their laundry. It's The
It-
end user that's struggling to get a promotion, the end user that's pissed off because they had to work 60 hours when they only got paid for 40 because one of their workflows is broken or one of their tools isn't right or right? And so you think about this and how quickly you can book meetings. Right now, the record that somebody doing this is 17 minutes.
to book a meeting.
They went and figured out one of their keywords that was used mid to late funnel. And it was kind of that when they started to really understand their problem, what were those next questions that they would go to before they would move to looking at solutions? So he figured out those and then he started searching for it
On social media, looking
and
for
then joined those
people who've
conversations and started answering. And the reason why that works so well is there's a reason why there's no cap on comments because LinkedIn wants to encourage people to have discussions on platform. So if you think of all what we normally would do in discovery, as long as it's not private and it's public knowledge and you're talking about their professional development and you're entertaining and you're helping them understand this problem but not specific to the company, keep that in the comments because it the LinkedIn will actually push it to your entire feed, to their feed. Anybody else that comments will get that notification. Birds of a feather flock together. And if they're not an active poster with a dynamic LinkedIn presence, you
mhm,
know who usually sees most of their posts?
like their coworkers and that kind of
Their
thing, or
coworkers. So when their
gotcha.
boss goes on, because if they don't invest in LinkedIn heavily, what's going to be prioritized in their feed? Your
Right.
nurture content. And as soon as you DM them too, so if you've connected and you've been talking the DMs and just having casual conversation, it actually prioritizes your content top of feed. So instead of having a sequencer sending out, nurture emails that are completely useless and nobody ever wants, you can create content that helps them, those end users, solve their problem, get more out of your product or whatever that may be. And the algorithm will help you do it because it's naturally opt in.
So that's really interesting. It doesn't matter if the person that you're commenting on their post, it doesn't really matter if they have a big following or a small following, as long as you understand that the big following will lead to birds of a feather, you getting additional exposure, or the small following means you're just going to get exposed to their small audience, which happens to be your target client. And so you start working your way up into their top of mind.
Absolutely. And just one thing to kind of just tee this up, like in IT, there's nodes. And nodes are your connection points that get you to 10 or more connections. So it's that leverage effect.
Right.
So who do your prospects listen to for advice? Who do they trust? So we think of the influencers, maybe it's Josh Braun, maybe it's Bilal, maybe it's Jen Allen. I could name a whole bunch of names that people go to for sales advice. If I go and I'm commenting and they see that those people they trust me and I have conversations, how are they going to see me? Well, I'm going to earn trust through association. But that's where most people stop. What if I go down and go through the comments, find people that are in my ICP and ask great questions that I can help continue that conversation and not steal the show? I can answer them and create that conversation and learn what problems they have, learn what questions they're asking, what they're interested in. And because they're a node, because maybe they have 10,000 followers or 20,000 followers, that pushes out to all of them as well. And this is where being really selfless with how you expand your knowledge and create that content goes so much further because if you actually break down LinkedIn, only 1% or less of people post regularly. Uh,
Mhm.
Give or take 9% of people engage regularly, and 90% lurk in the background because they just want to learn and they don't want to be seen.
Right.
So by doing this strategy, focusing on the 10%, you get access to the whole 100. I like those odds.
And that's what they call dark social, right? Is like, here's 90% of the people who don't comment, they don't post, but they're reading, and you don't even
Mhm.
know who they are. But if you can use that 10% to then wiggle your way into the decision makers, and get that exposure, that's kind of the bottom up approach that you're referring to.
Yeah, and then that's how you
Interesting.
go either campaign driven or you can go account driven. Campaign is based on the function where they're going to learn. Account is actually mapping out the account, figuring out where that pain could be, building that business case by talking to different levels. The one thing that nobody talks about outside of that is lifeline content.
What do you mean lifeline content?
So if I am building my business case by going bottom up, what if I built 60 days worth of content into my feed that's all based on helping these similar types of companies, whether it's this industry, this function, this seniority, and I'm posting that every day. So as I'm working these accounts, maybe it's 5, maybe it's more, and as I'm getting more connections, what do you think's happening?
You're getting promoted and fed to these people by the algorithm, and then the trust is being built as well, not just as a subject matter expert, but to your point earlier about they trust someone that trusts you, like the two layers of trust there. It seems like you're building a network effect just by doing that.
And this is why you don't need a personal brand to win on LinkedIn. You just need to know how the algorithm works and how people naturally act and make decisions. If you understand the psychology, this is where you don't need to spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. A lot of the people that we talk to that are doing this well, they spend about 30 minutes. The ones that are really having a big push to go and win big accounts, or they're trying to build a healthy pipeline, the most they'll do is 2 hours, and they'll break it up over 2 to 4 times a day, 30-minute blocks, and that's it. That's all you need to do, 30 minutes a day, unless this is a big priority and you're pushing. So, less really is more.
Well, I think of it in terms of like a person who's, let's go back to my personal trainer buddy who was, you know, pitch slapping me yesterday. If I go to the gym and I don't know what I'm doing, then I might spend hours at the gym multiple days a week, exhausting myself and not really getting anywhere. But if I have somebody who can tell me specifically the correct way to do this and be targeted with how you work different muscle groups and all these things, you can spend less time and see greater results in the same period of time. And it seems like that's the case with social selling.
Yeah, and if you tag in when the person's complaining about the first trainer, or they're complaining about they were trying on their own and they just didn't get where they wanted to go, there's a trigger that they're mentally ready for the change. They just don't know how to do it, and they would like some help, whether it's to give them the right information in feed, or hey, I'm actually a personal trainer. I could build you a customized program. Would that be helpful?
Right. Right. Well, that's really interesting, Nick, and we've already hit 30 minutes. That goes really quick. But hopefully this gives our listeners a sense of how just with a little bit of intentionality and some real strategy behind it, you spend less time on social media, get greater results, and work your way up from the outside in or from the bottom up to get to the decision maker. So I think we've sufficiently answered that question about how to book a meeting with anybody. Um, we do have a question. Do you want to take another minute or so to take a look at one of these questions here?
Yeah, if you want to go in at Katarina's question.
Yeah. So with content publishing, that'd be evergreen content highlighting problems that would be reused. Could we expand a bit on how marketing overlaps with sales? So we'll finish with this and get your input on that.
So I'm this might be a little bit spicy take, but this is where marketing and sales don't necessarily have to overlap. And the only reason why I say this a bit spicy is normally I say the opposite, but when you're running account based, if I look and I know that I have great access to sales and business development just because that's the work I've done, so I really understand their workflow, I'll default to there. But if I know in the earthquake that I need to talk to engineering, IT, finance, and those they're just not my wheelhouse, and I'm not credible when they look at my profile that I know my stuff, this is where marketing can really step in, whether it's talking to, somebody in finance that is a subject matter expert. It could be your own in-house expert. That content we can reuse and nurture. And so this is where the company brand can align with your personal brand by adding credibility in the areas where you're not credible. So this is knowing those levers, where to start and where to finish. So I would say go pick the functions that you're not strong and try to go and help get marketing to help you good content that helps change people's minds, so that you can focus on where you're strong and talk about your experience and share those stories, or even share the stories of those functions of past customers where they've won. and then that'll help people not have buyer's remorse and feel really strong about the decision they're about to make.
Well, thank you for taking that briefly, and hopefully that answered your question for you, Katerina. And thanks for putting that out there on the chat in the first place. So, Nick, do you have any call to action? Is there anything in particular you'd like our audience to do? What's the best way to get in touch with you, etc.?
My biggest call to action, we block 30 minutes in a day and start social selling. Um, if you want to get better at social selling and just want to go and hear some of the different basically tap into all the mistakes we made so you don't have to make them, go to b2bpowerhour.com. That's our podcast. We share the experiments that we're running to try to help you avoid those mistakes and see results faster.
That's
And
awesome.
thank you so much for inviting me on and having this great discussion. And thank you, the audience, for joining in. It means a lot, and I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And that lines up perfectly with the spirit of what I'm trying to do, with first gen entrepreneurs. I want to build a community that helps people who are figuring this out as they go so that they can avoid the pitfalls. And it's clear that with B2B Power Hour, you and your partner investing the time, you've made a lot of mistakes, I'm sure, along the way. And you're doing so publicly, right? You're learning in public and sharing that knowledge so that someone else doesn't have to invest the same amount of time as you have. So I appreciate what you're doing. It lines up perfectly with what I'm doing. So this has been fun. We're a little over time, but thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come on the show and drop some knowledge on us.
Happy to. Thank you for the invitation and can't wait to see what you're up to. Make sure you tag me in future events and let me know how I can help.
All right, thanks everybody. Tune in next week, Wednesday at noon. I've got another one coming up. I'll be promoting it soon. And thanks again, Nick. Have a good day.